Hi, I'm Norm Abram. Welcome to the new Yankee Workshop. Over the years, we've done a few upholstered projects. It started with a cigar chair, upholstered in leather, and it also had a footstool. A couple years ago, we did a tufted ottoman. That was a lot of fun. Well, today we're going to do a piece known as a window bench, right at the foot of a bed or between a pair of windows. I'll show you the antique inspiration next, and then we'll come back here and build our own version of the window bench. Well, Gary, once again, we turn to you to find an extraordinary piece of furniture, and you've done it again.
I have indeed. This is a very rare form. It's called a window bench. It was made in New England about 1800 to 1810, and it's very rare to find a piece that was made in this country.
Right, so you could not only use it at the foot of the bed, but you could put it under that double-hung window over there.
Exactly.
I like the fact that the ends are actually upholstered and has this nice curve that comes up and the fabric is wrapped around. Speaking of which, what is this material?
This is the original fabric. It may have been a little bit brighter originally, but it's very plain. It didn't have any pattern to it. It's like a muslin.
Well, my first inclination is tear all this off and reupholster it.
No. We don't want to do that. This piece is actually much more valuable because it has the original upholstery, and it's very rare to find a piece from this period that still has its original upholstery. This may be used in a museum as a display piece.
Really? Well, let's look at the construction a little bit. Starting up here, I see a nice solid piece of wood between the legs that's shaped to the form of the leg. Can we actually tip it up so I can look underneath it? Okay. All right, so it's a pretty simple frame, some 1.5" material, mortised cross pieces. This leg is mortised in. But somebody's done some repairs. There's some metal brackets here.
Those were added later.
And then you got these corner braces to keep it square.
Right, that's typical chair construction from this period, where they have these corner braces that are let into the top of the rails.
Right there, yeah. And the suspension seems to just be webbing material, and then of course they've built it up with old material. I guess today we might use something like foam material and a different kind of webbing. So if we were to go ahead and try to build this piece, I mean, you're talking about us reproducing something that's actually very rare.
It is. This is a form that you might only see a handful of in a lifetime. It's extremely rare.
So it's special.
It is.
Well, would you mind if I took a few pictures and some measurements?
It's all yours. Be my guest.
Thanks. Well, here's our version of that bench. And you know, I think this will look great at the foot of a bed, or perhaps under a window. Now, this is exactly the same size as the one Gary showed us, but that's where the similarities end. This one is built with modern materials and a fresh coat of fabric. Now, I must admit, I didn't do all the upholstery. I had some help from my friends Kendrick Starnes and Bobby Gant from Hickory, North Carolina. They helped me with the cigar chair and the tufted ottoman, earlier projects that I've done. And I'll show you what I learned from them a little bit later. Now, if you'd like to build your own window bench, a measure drawing is available, and also a source for the upholstery materials. Now, I want to start with the frame, which is built out of poplar. Now, this leg and this part right here is called a stump. And in between the stumps, there's a piece of wood, and it supports the fabric and everything that's underneath it. So over here, I have a couple pieces of poplar, which I want to glue together to make a blank. When I built the prototype, I took the time to make a full-scale template of the stump out of 1/4" plywood. And that comes in handy to lay out the shape on these pieces of 1.5" poplar, which will make up the stumps. Now, I've also laid out for some mortises, which will be used to connect the rails of the frame. Now, I want to cut the mortises first because it's a lot easier to do before I cut out the shape. Before we use any power tools, let's talk about shop safety. Be sure to read, understand, and follow all the safety rules that come with your power tools. Knowing how to use your power tools properly will greatly reduce the risk of personal injury. And remember this, there is no more important safety rule than to wear these safety glasses. Now here I've set up my dedicated mortiser with a 3/8" chisel. The bit will do most of the work, the chisel will square it up. And I'm going to make these 3/4 inch deep. Let's take another look at our prototype. This is one of the long rails which will connect the stumps, and it also needs a few mortises. one here in the center at the bottom to pick up the center leg, and a couple on the inside for some cross pieces. I want to make those while the mortise is set up. Well, now I'm ready to cut the shape of the stump out. And it's straight from the bottom to right about here. And that's best cut on the table saw. And the rest of it I'll finish on the bandsaw. So I've raised the table saw blade up and put a mark on the fence just forward of the leading edge. I'll bring this mark on my piece to that mark. When they align, I'll shut the saw down, remove the piece, move on to the next one. That's going to save us a lot of time. You'll note that I'm using a 1/2 inch wide bandsaw blade. I also have a very tight radius at the top of this stump. If I were to try to cut it with just the blade, it would bind. A few relief cuts solve that problem. Here I've ganged the 4 stumps together because I want to make a notch in all the pieces to receive this tack rail. It's a lot easier to do them all at once. I'm using just the saw blade. It's not worth the time to set up the dado. I'm going to hold the pieces tightly to the miter gauge as I push them through. And this is when it's important to have a slippery table. Also, when I push the piece through, I'm not going to back it through the blade. I'm going to lift it over the blade and make the next pass. That's for safety. Okay, let's see how we did. That's going to be good. Let me show you what we've done so far. We've formed the 4 stumps. I've mortised the long rails as needed. I've cut the pieces for the cross pieces and the end rails. Now it's time to start forming tenons. I need tenons on each end of the long rail to go into this mortise. I need tenons on the short rails to go into this mortise, and slightly different tenons for the cross pieces as well as these, which will be the center leg. Now the key here is that because the tenons are slightly different, to save time, I want to make all the similar cuts at once. The length of all the tenons is the same. I've set up a stop block and I've locked the fence in place. That's never going to change. What will change is the height of the saw blade, and that's not too difficult. I'll guide the pieces through with my miter gauge. Now I'll just check the height and make the next series of cuts. For the last few minutes, I've been making the cheek cuts on the tenons, using my tenoning jig and adjusting it as necessary. Here I've assembled some of the pieces for the frame. Where they meet the post, I want to make a notch to let in a corner brace to make the frame more rigid. I'll do that over at the table saw. I've set my miter gauge at 45 degrees. I've set up this stop block so that I can just bring the tenon against the block and make the first cut on each end. Now I'll swing it to 45 degrees on the other side of 0 and make the corresponding cut. Using the stock for the brace as a guide, I've marked the other side. Now I'll just nibble away the material between the cut and the line. The legs on our bench are tapered. It gives the piece a sense of lightness. On the corner legs, the outside corners remain straight and the inside edges get tapered. On this center leg, the front remains straight, the sides are tapered, and the back is tapered. It starts at the bandsaw. I'm going to freehand these pieces through the bandsaw. A tapering jig doesn't do me much good. To smooth up that cut, I'm just using my belt sander. Well, now that our dry fit has confirmed all the work to this point, we can glue it up and clamp it. Well, now I'm ready to glue in these little corner braces, and I'll secure them with a couple brads while the glue dries. Now this little cross piece or tack strip that goes into those notches that I made in the stumps. Glue and nails. Now I need to make the piece that goes between these stumps. Remember the glue up I did earlier? I've cleaned that up, and I've laid out on the end of it using my full-scale template the top of the stump. Now I've squared up the line in this corner because I want a nice clean corner to attach some of the upholstery. I'll notch that out first, then by tipping the saw at different angles I'll remove the majority of material around the edge. Well, now what I'm going to do is install that piece by putting some glue on the inside of each stump, spreading them out so I can get them started in here. And once it's in the right position, I'll secure it with one 3-inch screw in each end. But one thing I want to do before I leave tonight so I can upholster this piece is stain the legs, the parts that show. I'm using a combination of red mahogany and brown mahogany stain. I'll put on a nice even coat, and when that dries I'll seal it with some satin lacquer. Well, good morning. I'm starting this morning by shaving the arm flush with the stump, and when I get the bulk of the material away I'll sand it smooth. You can see how removing most of the material at the table saw makes this step easier. Now the antique, you might recall, had some webbing underneath it, and it was a jute material, which is a natural fiber. The webbing that we're using is a synthetic, so it should last forever. Now the staples that I'm using are 3/8 inch long, and this is an upholstery stapler that will shoot staples from 1/4 inch to 5/8 of an inch. Well, now I want to stretch this webbing nice and tight, and if I come over here I can show you the tool. It's called an upholsterer's tool. It has a nice wide jaw with teeth so it grips the material. This can function as a hammer, but it's also a good leverage point. Now you can still buy these new. This one I found at an antique flea market. Now Bobby and Kendrick thought that this wide space needed a little extra support, so we'll put a couple pieces across the bench. Now this material is known as a woven polypropylene. It's a very strong synthetic material. It'll provide additional support for the seat. It gets stapled and stretched on the frame. This is to notch around the stump. Now I bend it over on itself, flush with the edge of the frame, and staple it again. Now I'm going to install another piece of the woven polypropylene on the inner arm. It'll get tacked to this tack strip and the edge of the arm. I'll stretch it nice and tight. Now I'm switching to some foam, a polyurethane foam, a 1/2 inch thick. I'm going to tuck it under the arm and then down the inside and staple it. Now once again, we will give you a source where you can get these materials. Now here I'm just going to put one tack on each side into the stump. Now this is known as cotton batting, upholsterer's batting, and what I want to do is lay a piece over the foam, tuck it under the edge here and around the arm, and then I'll trim off the edges so it just sticks by a little bit. Now I don't cut this, I just tear it away, and I don't attach it with any staples because it doesn't have any structure. It just kind of sticks to the foam. Now here I'm just going to leave it a little wider than the frame itself. really just enough to sort of cover the edge of the foam. Here's the fabric we're going to use. It's a Teflon cashmere. It's fairly heavy. It has a geometric pattern with this nice divider line. And we got it as a remnant at the fabric store. It was real inexpensive, about $6 a yard. Now, because of the pattern, I'm going to have to be careful how I align it. So what I think I'm going to do is keep one of the lines right in the center, side to side, and then I'm also going to bring one line right at the top of the arch of the seat. Centered right there. So I'm just going to base tack it. I may have to pull these tacks and reattach the fabric again as I stretch it and tuck it. I've made a cut on each side that aligns with the inside of the stump, just short of the vertical edge. Now I'm going to push this piece through carefully and tack it. Okay, now I can pull it through. And for now, I'm just going to temporarily tack it to the back of the tack rail. I may have to move it again later. So now I'm trimming away a little bit of the excess material down at this corner, and I'm going to just fold it under and wrap it around that stump, trying to get it nice and neat so there's no wrinkles. And then I can staple it right there. Now all these staples will be covered later with additional fabric. Now, if we take a look at our prototype, you can see that at the top of the arm there's a series of pleats. That's probably the most difficult part of this upholstery job. I start by placing a few staples right here on the edge of this outer curve. And what I want to do is take the fabric and tuck it, make sure it's not too wrinkled, and then staple it. And I'll cut away material as I make each pleat. Okay, let's see what happens. I noticed that Bobby and Kendrick weren't bashful about pulling staples. It's part of the process. Okay, get a staple right there. Now I want to tuck it right under the arm and staple it there. I think that's looking pretty good. Now I'll move on to the other stump. Now these little patches add a feature to the end of the arms, and the joint will actually be covered with a fabric ribbon a little bit later on. Let me show you how I do the patch. Just take some material, fold it over, I'm holding it about a ½ inch down, and I'll just staple it and work my way around. Now I'm in no hurry to cut it off until I absolutely have to, because this tail gives me something to tug on. The seat is next. So first, a strip of 5-inch wide batting. It'll give a little crown to the seat, which is made of this 3-inch foam. I'll just squeeze that down between the sides, get it centered, and staple it along the edge. I want this to be about flush with the edge, not sticking over too much. More cotton batting on top of the foam, and I want to tear it off even with the bottom of the frame and tuck a little bit under each end. I don't use scissors here, I just force it up against the sharp edge and tear it off. Now this is not going to be stapled on, it's just going to sit on the foam. I'll put the fabric right on the top. All right, now here's the fabric. And when I cut the fabric, I put a little notch right here in the center. And that wants to be at the center of the leg. And I'm going to line up the pattern to the arms that we already did. Now that I've got the fabric centered, I'm going to make a little cut on each side of the center leg, tuck the fabric under, and staple it so it's right even with the bottom of the frame. Right there. Now this is just temporary. I may have to move these later as I stretch the fabric more. Now I have to cut the fabric so I can slip it under that inner arm, and this is a trick that Bobby taught me. I want to come in about 1.5 inches, which is the width of the stump. I cut in so that I'm about 1/2 inch away from that arm. I don't want to cut too far. I can always cut it a little further. And then so I'll be able to fold it over. I want to come back a bit and cut in at about a 45-degree angle, like that. I'll do that on each side, and then we'll be ready to pull it through. Now I'm going to push that piece through. Okay, see if I can grab a hold of it. Okay, it looks pretty well centered. I can see it aligning with the pattern from the side, and we'll just base tack it. And again, I may have to tighten that up a bit more later. I'm going to pull this down, try to keep it nice and even all along the edge, and just temporarily tack it. I want it snug, but not too tight. I may have to do it a couple times. I've removed a little bit of the batting here on the edge, made a cut at the leg. We'll tuck that underneath first and staple it. Now here at the leg, I've just folded the fabric under, tack it right there, then roll this side in, try to get a nice clean pleat, wrap it around the end and staple it off. Earlier I temporarily tacked the fabric from the inner arm to that cleat. Now I'm going to bring it back down around the outside and staple it underneath. Well, now I'm ready for the outer arm. Here's the piece of fabric with the good side facing down. I'm tucking it in the corner where that notch or cutout is in the arm, and I'm going to staple it there. Now I'm going to take this piece of low melt fiber, tuck it right down to the bottom, and I'll bring my fabric up and stretch it and staple it. Now I just fold the fabric on itself and make a seam right up the center of the stump. Well, now another synthetic material called Typar, and that's really sort of a dust cover for the bottom of the piece. And it just gets stapled on. Okay, that looks good. Now we have one more finishing detail. Well, we're almost there. Now we have to lay on this material that upholsterers call GIMP, this fabric ribbon. And I'm just trying to space out the tacks as evenly as possible. And we'll run it right straight down that seam. More GIMP and tacks about 1 inch on center along the bottom. Well, night has fallen here at the new Yankee Workshop, but we have another completed window bench, ready for the foot of a bed or under a window, or perhaps even in a hallway. It was a fun project to build. So until next time, I'm Norm Abram for the new Yankee Workshop.
If you've enjoyed this new Yankee project, you may want to try some of the others. There are projects meant for the workshop, the garden, the kitchen, and many more. So whether you're a fan of shaker style, or colonial, arts and crafts, or Chippendale, there may be a Norm project you'd like to build. Whether it's a clock or a gazebo, a picnic bench or a Windsor chair, a child's toy or a sailboat, visit the New Yankee website at www.newyankee.com for a complete listing.